Yes.
Okay, it looks like the attendees are coming in yet, so we'll just wait until we feel we've got enough people here to start. Welcome, everyone. Yes, it's only just 11 o'clock, so we're just going to give it a couple of minutes before we start, just to allow everyone that's coming to join. It's just past 11, so should we get going and people can come in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for coming today and joining us to mark National Adoption Week with this roundtable on early intervention and prevention in adoption. My name's Sarah Peter and I'm hosting this event today along with my co-host Eva Krasnow. And Eva and I are the founders and directors of Chorus, which is a social enterprise which aims to improve the long-term outcomes for children and families who experience adversity by providing specialist therapeutic interventions in children's earliest years. I'm going to hand over now to Eva to tell you a little bit about our work with adoptive families and how the idea for this event today has come about.
Thank you, Sarah, and hi, everybody. For the last 7 years, we have run, in partnership with Adopt London South, a parent-toddler group in South London for adopters of toddlers and babies. And it has been quite a phenomenal experience. We feel so privileged to meet families at the start of their family life and be alongside them as they get to know each other, explore their relationships, deepen their bonds, and then move further off into their futures together. What we have learned from this hugely inspiring work is that there is no such thing as a typical adoptive family, and that people have a huge range of experiences. And what we're really keen to do is to sort of be able to come together, because as we've worked more and more with families who've adopted and seen the range of experiences people have, loving, happy, excited, passionate, difficult, heartbreaking, the whole gamut really of feelings, and work closely with our colleagues in the regional adoption agencies and other therapeutic providers. We sort of know that there's just a big range of different experiences that people are having. So what we wanted to do was to celebrate adoption in the National Adoption Week, and also bring people together so we can have a real think together about the range of these experiences, and sort of what we can do about them, really. We after today, so we carried out a poll, which we'll go through this morning, and use for our basis for our discussion. And after today, what we want to do is to gather our thoughts and ideas that we generate this morning into a charter of need that we can all use to raise awareness about what families need who are looking after children who've been adopted in the early years, now and next.
So just to let people know, we're recording this event today, and that's for people who couldn't make it but wanted to still hear about it and take part. Um, so as Eva said, in a minute, we're going to kind of present some slides on some kind of a poll that we did of adoptive families. But before we do that, I'm really excited to ask our expert panel of kind of adoption people with adoption expertise and experience to introduce themselves. We've got a really fantastic panel here today who are going to be discussing this area and our findings. Yeah, here we go. We've got everyone here now. Okay, great. So if I come first to Dee.
Morning. Hi, I'm Dee. I'm a single adopter of a 3.5-year-old, and he came to me when he was 22 months old.
Thanks very much, Dee. And Denise.
Yes, hello. I'm Denise Golding. I'm a social worker and a counsellor. I've been working in the field of adoption for nearly 30 years in all different areas and for many different local authorities and adoption agencies in that time. I'm also one of the trainers of the Great Behaviour Breakdown, or GBB as people know it, which I've been running with Zach for probably nearly 15 years now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Denise. Natalie.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie Bendel. I'm one of the managers for post-adoption services at Adopt London South, and I've had the privilege of working closely with Eva and Sarah to help our families link in to the fantastic toddler group that we've been running. So we've been working together on that for a number of years, and also working with Denise to offer the Great Behaviour Breakdown as well. So yeah, that's my role.
Thanks very much, Natalie. Emma.
Hello everyone, my name's Emma Goodman. I'm a clinical psychologist and I've been working with families at the earliest point of their journey together for over 20 years, and I'm currently working in Cornwall Creative Therapies team.
Great, thank you, Emma. Paula.
Hi everyone, I'm Paula Oliveira and I'm a researcher in attachment, parenting and child development in contexts of looked after children and children with experience of being in care.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paula. And Holly.
Hi, my name's Holly. I'm an adoptive parent to my eldest daughter, who is now 4.
Great. Thanks so much, Holly. And thank you again, everyone, for being here. It's a really amazing range of expertise we've got here today. So really looking forward to discussing and hearing your discussions. Okay, so we're going to move on now, I think, to our sort of presentation part of today.
Okay. Hopefully everyone can see this. Promise it's not going to be death by slides, okay? So we carried out a poll of adoptive families in preparation for this event, asking them a series of questions about their experiences at the beginning of family life. And this is what we found. So just what we'll go through today are the demographics of who answered the questions on past adverse experiences for children and for parents, questions about the adoptive experience in those first years, asking people about the top 3 areas of concern or attention, looking back what help was really helpful for people, which was what was good, and looking back with the beautiful view of hindsight, what, if you had a magic wand, could you give yourself that was missing then? And then finally, we'll just put that in context of the latest adoption barometer. Okay, so it's actually 89 people responded to our poll. We had a couple of late entries, and we had 134 children sort of spoken about in total. And what we see, and maybe we can think a bit about this in our discussions, is that just over a third of children were adopted over 3, and less under 2. So most children are coming in toddlerhood, sort of late infancy. And of course, there's different developmental tasks for those age groups, and they will have had different experiences according to where they've been before they come home to their adoptive families. So lots of food for thought and complexity in that. We asked parents to to tell us where they knew which areas their children had experienced adverse times in. Of course, we know all adoptive children have adverse experiences, but what we see here was that 54% of children had more than 3, which we know sets them up as highly vulnerable for sort of later emotional and mental health difficulties. So we can see already from the beginning, this is a vulnerable population that we need to be thinking about and working with. What Sarah and I find really interesting about these results is that you can see that neglect is the highest area of difficulty. And what we see therapeutically is often children who've had sort of quite chronic experiences of neglect can present as often precociously advanced in an area of their development. They're very good at talking, or their motor control is very good, or they're very intellectually advanced. But what we know, or they seem fine, everything seems fine, but what we know is often that's quite a brittle mask covering up a very varied picture underneath, and these children can really, really struggle with quite extreme emotional dysregulation difficulties. So again, sort of bringing out that the type of experiences that children have will, of course, impact on their presentation. And just because a child seems fine, they may also still have needs that we have to meet. We'll talk about that later, I hope. We also asked parents to give us an idea about what their childhood experiences were like. And what we were sort of surprised about and interested in is that 11% of the parents in our poll reported 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, which sets people up for toxic stress, it's called. So, really recommended is probably the need of some additional help to sort of think through the impact of those experiences. And that is higher than national average, which is 8%. So again, this is really interesting. Maybe we could think about this together. Is this something about what brings people to adoption? Does it help us think about what support we need to give parents? And there's another slide which talks to this a bit more. Okay, I think it does show for us, for example, the complexity of working with adoptive families, really, and how we need to be very sort of sensitive and careful and respectful in those ways.
Okay, so we also asked a series of questions about asking parents to kind of rate their experiences in the early kind of weeks and months of when their children came home to them. So we asked them how emotionally prepared they felt. As you can see, kind of almost half, just under half of parents felt kind of somewhat or completely prepared. But actually, a larger proportion, very slightly larger proportion, over half of parents either kind of rated that as neutral or somewhat not or not at all prepared. And I won't say too much about this now because we're going to kind of keep coming back to this as it feels very important. I think it just raises questions about, why does a large proportion of parents feel unprepared? What can be done to prepare families more or differently or better? What is the reality of how prepared you can feel for any transition to parenthood, but particularly the kind of complexities that come with transitioning to parenthood of an adopted child? So I think we'll keep coming back to that. I think it's a real kind of question that we want to explore. So then this is a kind of similar question, linked, I think, related or linked. So we also asked people to rate kind of how close their expectations were to the reality of their early months with their child or children. Again, similar. In fact, even fewer parents felt that they were kind of very close or somewhat close to expectation, and a much greater proportion of parents, so kind of over 60% of parents said that, they were either kind of neutral or not at all or somewhat not at all close to what they expected. Again, I think this is a really complex area about how possible it is to kind of have accurate expectations. But really important for us to explore, what are the experiences of parents? What are they finding kind of very different? And what's the impact of that on families in these really important early weeks and months?
Mm. And just to sort of tack on to that, Sarah, in the context of the last slides about adverse experiences, of course, as Sarah said, a transition, any major life and identity transition, like becoming a parent, is going to be unsettling and unexpected in some ways. But of course, people are becoming parents to children who have had challenging experiences right at the beginning of their lives. So it's not starting from zero, as we often say in our groups, that you're moving into parenting a child who will need additional support emotionally.
So then kind of again, sort of, linked question, which is how well supported did people feel by professionals at this point? Again, it's sort of a similar picture. There is a chunk of people that felt, really well or quite well supported, good or very good support. But there are a lot of people who are sort of neutral or felt there was little to no support. And as Eva sort of mentioned in the introduction, we've met a whole range of families, and everyone's experience is different. And we know that there are families that have brilliant support, and we know that there are lots of professionals who are able to give brilliant support. But I think it is important to acknowledge that not everyone accesses that, or not everyone has that experience. And where people aren't having that experience, it's really, really important for us to try and understand why and how we can raise that percentage of people who do have a good experience of support up. We all thought we'd ask also about peer support, which is so important. When you're doing something like adoption, where it can easily feel very isolating. Again, a bit higher proportion, so more than 50% of people, as you can see here, felt they had good or very good support from peers. But again, quite a big proportion of people also didn't, and I think, or were neutral or felt they had kind of little to no support. And I think that's a really interesting question of, what is it, what happens in the kind of the family and the social context in those early weeks and months of adoption that is challenging. And we'll say a bit more about that actually, because that came up in the sort of more free text bit of our answers that we're going to talk through.
Just to sort of link back to the adverse childhood experiences, we sort of cross-referenced some of the answers a bit, and we found that parents who had had more than one adverse childhood experience were more likely to feel emotionally unprepared when adopting, were to find their expectation was not the same as the reality, were less likely to find themselves supported by professionals or peers, and would find it more difficult to access services. So I guess how we understand this is that we need to work harder to understand the sort of needs of families and really sort of tailor our support packages to help people be able to access what help there is available.
So the next bit we're going to go through, as I said, is we asked people more to kind of tell us some things in more free text. And so we did a kind of mini thematic analysis on this to draw out some themes. The first question we asked was we asked people to give us the top 3 areas of concern or attention in the early years of their family life. And unsurprisingly, we've kind of got these 3 themes, and they sound a bit obvious, but we did think they're kind of worth talking through a bit. So it came up in a way on 3 levels. So the first main theme were concerns about the child. So things related to the child's developing attachment, their well-being, and their kind of, the dynamics within the family, how they're integrating in, how the child is integrating into the family. And lots of examples, as we've got in the quote here, of, children kind of, the sort of wide range of ways that children can kind of communicate their needs and difficulties in those early weeks. So sleep and eating, behavior difficulties, And, this quote here that, very poignantly talks about the grief that the child was experiencing, that this family were very aware of in the separation from her foster family. The next sort of level of kind of concern is the kind of the parent and family, and I think this come up quite a lot, and it's just important to remember really is that it's not just the child that kind of comes, of course, with lots of need and needs a lot of support and thinking about, but also the parents and the caregivers around that child, the family around that child, and I think this quote brings that to life really. We're exhausted, dysregulated the whole time, and we do hear from parents that actually that is a common experience early on, along with all the positive experiences as well. And we've asked people about their concern here. So of course we're talking about the kind of the difficulties. We're very aware that there's wonderful, joyous experiences in that's beginning time as well. But alongside that there are huge challenges that can be harder to talk about actually, and maybe that will come up in our discussion. So the parent concerns for themselves and for their well-being, really important. And then on top of that, and it's just, really building the picture of the complexity really, there were concerns relating to sort of the broader social system and experiences. And that related both to the need to have other families around you who have similar experiences, who have a sense of what adoption really means, what it's like, have been through that either before or at the same time, but also for the professionals and the professional networks, the adoption people who are working in adoption, but also the broader systems, mental health systems, physical health systems, local authorities, how much or how little they might understand about adoption and how that can actually impact families in those early weeks and months. And if we just, on the next slide, there's just a bit more, I think we went to 2 there, Eva, can you go back one? Yeah. So this is just a bit more, I won't sort of talk through this in too much detail, but this is just a bit more depth about how we sort of came to those themes. And you can see on this slide, there's kind of about 3, I think, which are really about the child. So, managing the child's emotions and behaviours, often expressed in emotional dysregulation or aggression, tantrums, defiance. Also expressed, if you look down at the bottom, in kind of more sort of practical feeling needs, so sleeping, eating, toileting, and the kind of parental needs then kind of joining in with that, kind of any transition to parenthood is a shock of how much the impact of it on parental life and routines, and that's kind of complicated and intensified in adoption because the child also can often have complex needs as well. Concerns about both the child's building of attachment, and again, if we just think there that it's both the child's need to build attachment, but also the impact of on the parent when that's felt to be a struggle. So people talked about a sense of rejection when they didn't feel they were building the attachment kind of quickly enough or well enough or strongly enough. And concerns about the child's development. So people sometimes talk about this in terms of potential diagnoses, sensory development, and also developmental trauma. And we think it's interesting to think about how the language of diagnosis, which can sometimes be helpful, but can also sometimes be a kind of an easier thing to look for, or a more common thing to look for, more available language to look for than maybe the language of attachment and trauma, and there can sometimes be a tension with that, and that's something that comes up in our work a lot. And then there's the part about services as well. No, that's fine. Yeah, we can move on. And again, just sort of pointing out a few more kind of things that came up, that definitely parental self-confidence and the uncertainties around adoption plays into this picture a lot. Feeling kind of the kind of fear and anxiety or stress was heightened due to either kind of a lack of confidence or kind of uncertainty around the sort of the adoption, the adoption order, the legal side of adoption. and all these other kind of elements that I've kind of touched on really. But maybe it's worth also just mentioning working with trauma, the kind of vicarious trauma that parents might experience through their children, and the struggle with kind of knowing, understanding, differentiating between what might be really, in big inverted commas, normal or expectable behavior, and what might be related to trauma or neglect. And that's again something we see parents thinking about a lot, wanting to understand more, and it's a very complex area.
We also asked people about what help people received that was useful. And we had three main themes coming out here again. So the first one was people felt that the multidisciplinary support that they got from statutory services was really good. So that's from social care, from regional adoption agencies, from specialist therapeutic and psychological support services too. So someone wrote, we had regular contact with our social worker, took our daughter to a weekly therapy group using the ASSG SF. And we were able to also be put in contact with a therapist to support our decisions. A social support network was another major theme that was of use, and that was family, friends, and adoption peers and mentors, which we'll come up to talk about quite a lot. Someone saying that they found other adopters who were experiencing similar issues but were further along their journey. Without this invaluable support, the placement might have failed. I mean, what a powerful communication, right, to sort of show that the stakes are very, very high. And educational resources and training. So on parenting, on child development, on working with trauma and more. And someone here, access a therapeutic parenting course and a local adoption group. Other sub-themes sort of that fed into those major overall themes. So parenting groups and peer networks. This came up a lot. Someone says here, talking to others in a similar situation to normalize what was happening and realizing that you weren't alone. So really some people finding it incredibly valuable to have a community of people who can empathize based on shared experience. Oh, look at this. I promise you we didn't pay them. Someone wrote here in Child Psychological Support Services, going to a chorus adoptive toddler group. So yes, so our groups will be providing psychological support, but also trying to engender that community connection as well. And here, parent and family psychological services for parents maybe to access without their children. And then parent education and training again. So learning about child development, about parenting skills, about trauma and adoption. And this parent gave an example through NVR, which is non-violent resistance, which is an absolutely brilliant program. Last things on there. So again, social care support services. So families accessing support through their regional adoption agency, really using that support to learn about the legal processes, what services are out there, help them understand what's going on. It's a very intimate relationship actually that you build with your assessing social worker, and maybe this is something we can discuss a bit in the panel. Also public or private agencies, charities or funds, so using the ASGSF to access specialist services like Quorum or Chorus, We Are Family. Of course, this is sort of feels a bit poignant at best, talking about this now, because we've had a 40% cut to this fund for this year and for next year with no idea about what's going to happen after that. So those services that have been helpful have been severely restricted. And family and friends, people who sort of can get it, as well as sort of maybe family coming around to do some of that life min while you focus on the important bits.
So we then, as we said, asked people to kind of say, what with the benefit of hindsight, what would have been helpful. And there's a few main themes here. So as we said, kind of adoption, therapeutic, parenting groups, and peer networks just came up again and again. To be with other adoptive parents who have similar experiences, or mentors. So kind of, people who are there doing it at the same time as you, or have done it just before you, seem to be both really helpful. And that, I think we've said that, we've actually read that quote already. but that was, really a kind of a key, feels like it's been a key support that people have either found very useful or wish they had had, actually.
Mm.
And alongside that, I think it's really important, alongside that, actually, people really want access to kind of education, training, education, resources to really sort of build up their knowledge on things like trauma, child development, and well-being in general, to sort of feel really prepared, I think, and informed. Other main themes are kind of, as we mentioned in a way in the last section, kind of support services for parents in their own right, helping, so professionals, not just education, but professionals helping parents with kind of support with caring for their child, both at the beginning and also in an ongoing way. Preparation, so this comes back to the beginning bit. So people talk about wanting this kind of sufficient, realistic understanding prior to adoption to help prepare accordingly. And I think this is interesting. So some people feel that they didn't get enough of a sense of what the reality of adoption is like. Other people, I think, felt that once their child was placed with them, it was just different to what they expected, and they needed support then. And I think what's kind of important here or something that we felt kind of comes out of this is the idea about proactive support from the beginning. That actually kind of acknowledging that, we can give preparation early on, and preparation can be done early on, and that can be really helpful. But actually, it's very possible to still feel unprepared, and that actually kind of psychological and practical and peer support being offered proactively from early on. People, I think, said that they feel that would have been really, really helpful.
Mm.
And along with that is sort of the bottom one there really is timely introduction and access to services. So I think there's something about how confusing it can be, knowing what service is what, how difficult it can be sometimes to get in touch with or know how to contact services or navigate the system. And that's on top of a time in life when you're coping with lots of other challenges, that's even more difficult. So something about how to make those systems more accessible and easier to navigate for families. So as we've said, there were a big proportion of families that found that had lots of really good support and really valued the support they got from peers, from professionals, from family. But we did want to acknowledge that there were a kind of, a chunk of parents, 18%, that didn't find the services they received helpful or couldn't access support. And I think these kind of quotes just speak a bit to a sense sometimes of being kind of left and not knowing where to go, or of a kind of patchiness in the services. So maybe seeing that there was support, but they couldn't access it. So I think that's just really important to recognise. And I think we all know that there can be patchiness in statutory support and in all kinds of support. But just to, I think that is one of the factors that came out of this, which impacted the group of people that didn't find services helpful in those early weeks and months.
And I think so that finding that for some people they felt very sort of isolated and alone and unhelped in the context of the difficulties that the children might come with in their prior experiences and the vulnerability of some parents sort of really begins to pull into sort of three dimensions the complexity of family life in these cases. Okay.
So I can't remember. Am I doing this bit, Eva? Is it me?
This is you.
Okay. Okay. So we've said most of this actually. So again, we did say it wouldn't be death by slides, and I think we're going to finish just about on time for this. But all sorts of support groups were seen to be valuable. So, and the fact that groups mean that you can kind of listen to others, hear from others, and share with others, which is something we find in our groups is an incredible benefit. Normalize, feel less alone. that group support can carry on after a group finishes, so it's sustainable. That it's nice to have professionals in groups as well as peers. Can you get both those elements? People talked about mentors, which were kind of touched on, about kind of someone maybe that's a bit further on in the journey being really, really helpful. Maybe people can feel more kind of honest and feel more relaxed and maybe be able to be more open and honest when they feel they're with peers. We've talked about the lack of preparation some people experience or feel. And the transition, quite a few people talked about valuing the ongoing contact with the foster carer after adoption. As you know, things change, the child develops, of course, the family develops, and actually kind of really valuing that ongoing contact with the foster carer as new or different questions might develop. And actually that transition, where possible, and we know that sometimes the system doesn't allow this for lots of reasons, but the adequate time and care given to the transition process, people really value that.
Okay, we just wanted to sort of finish by talking to the sort of annual National Adoption Barometer report. So this one, 2025's one, came out very recently. So it's, as you know, it's the annual stocktake of the impact of policy and practice in adoption and related issues on the lives of adoptees and adoptive families. So they have a section there on the early stages, which is relevant for this event. And they found that 29% of parents felt like they were not given all the information they needed before the child came home. And that 57%, this is quite staggering, felt the process was so difficult they wondered if they would be able to continue. And again, that sort of echoes one of our findings about a parent saying that if they didn't have someone ahead of the road, further down the road, hand-holding them in a way, the placement might have failed. Again, transitions, major continuing interactions with foster carers, managing those relationships, how to prepare a young child for a move. I would have a big question mark about how that's possible. For everybody, and we can maybe think about that in our discussion. Managing the isolation during those early weeks. Also thinking about accessing support was a big one. We're very interested in this, the need for differentiation and support for parents and different developmental points for children. So, of course, a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old will have different needs. And again, here, peer support. And then some sort of quite sobering views on public healthcare services. Only 8% of parents completely agree that pet professionals have a good understanding of care experience in adopted children. Food for thought for our panel, certainly, and that there was not a clear understanding within agencies about whose job was what, which being within the system, I absolutely recognise for myself, certainly. So yeah, lots of work for us to do. Their recommendations were for peer support to be part of a core offer from the beginning of placement, for there to be pre-placement support planning meetings to include representation from the adoption support team and clinical specialists where indicated. And I guess I would probably bold and underline where indicated. I wonder what those indications might be. That might be a point of discussion for us. And also for training in adoption for health and education professionals. So pulling out a few different things from us, but generally we can see similar difficulties. So we just wanted to end on this quote, which we felt was really sort of evocative and communicated so much of the complexity in families' experiences that we work with, certainly. We found it really hard to switch from trying to evidence to our social worker during assessment that we were going to be great, resourceful parents, to then having to ask for help because we were struggling. That felt really tough. It would have been helpful to have the switch in emphasis said out loud to us repeatedly, so we knew to expect it and be able to do it ourselves. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of our slides for now, and we're going to kind of move in now to our roundtable discussion. Just to let you know, we'd love you to ask questions while the discussion is going on, if you want to use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we'll be able to see those, and we'll come to them at the end when we've got a little bit of time for the panel to ask questions. But I suppose so. I wanted to really kick off the roundtable discussion just really by acknowledging that quote and how powerful it is, really, and about this kind of jarring switch that could be needed between the sort of pre-adoption assessment phase, which parents need to demonstrate their abilities and their resources and strengths, and then the initial post-adoption phase that we've been thinking about today, when you really need to be able to acknowledge struggles, acknowledge when you're struggling. And I thought it was really interesting that this parent talks about, actually what you need is to be told this repeatedly. So something about the idea that actually, I think it links into the preparation point, actually there isn't a kind of, do X, Y, and Z and you're prepared. There's something about an ongoing task. And it being somehow helpful to have some of that, some of that challenge articulated. So I wanted to come first to start off our discussion, really to the parents on our panel, and just ask you, Holly and Dee, does that resonate with you? And what in a way, what were your experiences? Holly.
Yes, I would say definitely. I think a big part of it is I think it was mentioned on the slides as well, the uncertainty around adoption orders. And I think where you've got this level of uncertainty where you don't know that, that the child is going to stay with you, you still feel like you're constantly wanting to prove that you are the right home for them and you can cope and you are okay and you are, a good prepared parent. But at the same time, it's exactly that of you're struggling and you do think this is harder than I thought or different. I know for me, the idea of adoption is often romanticized, as we know. And I was quite shocked. I've got a lot of childcare experience. I had worked as nannies and in nurseries before, so that was kind of a tick for me. But I hadn't really thought about the emotional side of it. And for me, it wasn't love at first sight, and I didn't love her straight away. And that was a real shock. And so I was kind of grappling with that for quite a long time, thinking, is this normal? Will it come? And you're almost afraid to say it or talk to people. Again, because of the uncertainty, and you're so desperate to remain a family. So I don't know what's dinging there. I'm not very good technically. So
Don't know if it's
I'll be
you.
back on mute in a minute. Sorry.
That's thank you, Holly. Thanks so much. It feels so important to have that verbalized, the kind of it wasn't love at first sight feeling that I think parents find it hard to verbalize sometimes, but a lot of parents feel. Dee, can we come to you next?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think in my journey, and I've echoed this a couple of times, is that you're not prepared because there's so many books you can read, watch videos, people talking to you professionally. In reality, you have this bundle of joy which you wanted to have, and the struggles are real. And I feel not having somebody to talk to who's been through it would have helped move my transition. Like Holly, I mean, for me, I'm an overbearing nurturer, so I fell in love with him straight away. But the challenges are you do feel isolated, and I think one of the things that I wasn't prepared for was grieving my single identity. So before he came along, I had so many things and I was prepared, but grieving your single identity was something that has crept up on me, and it was like I felt like it was a taboo that I couldn't talk about it to anybody, and I kept it to myself. And it was the day-to-day struggle of do you know if you're doing it right? Are you doing it the right way? How's that person, that child feeling? And it was a lot of question marks and nobody to talk to about it.
Thanks, Dee. It's, really, really important to sort of acknowledge that, yeah, it's not just about the child's needs and your relationship with the child, but also your whole relationship with yourself, your whole identity changing at this point and having to cope with that. Maybe I can ask you to come in here, Natalie, just because I guess thinking about that kind of preparation period and that tension between preparation and the reality, and you've got so much experience working with families, and you've been such a supporter for us of working with toddlers, helping us to do this work with toddlers at this earliest stage. I'm just wondering, what's your kind of experience and views on that?
I mean, I'd just like to say both what Holly and Dee has said just absolutely resonates. I mean, I think adjusting to parenting's one of the hardest thing you can do in the world. And then when you're adopting, it's like 10 times harder. You're sort of asked to be this parent overnight of a most complex child. And you know what Holly was saying, there's no guarantee or rule book that you're going to connect with this child. And often, I think now people do get to meet the child, and you have longer introductions, and all of this is supposed to help with that. But there's no guarantees, and it can take time. And I've worked with families because I work in post-adoption now mainly who, at 18, you can see they've never connected with the child. And that's tragic for everyone, to have lived like that. It really is. I don't have any answers. I know there's preparation groups, but adopters sort of say to me that they're often so overwhelmed with so much information and feel their own show. And I think that's a very, very, I don't work in assessment anymore, but I used to. And I think obviously you're having to get through this panel and prove yourself. But actually, then when you get the child, I think this fear of failure and fear that you're not doing right is massive. And I think, more work needs to be done around it's okay to go, I'm finding this really hard and I'm not sure if I'm going to love this child or I don't know what to do because all new parents feel that way. But when you're adopting, it is tenfold. It is one of the hardest things in the world to sort of really recognize that. Um, and it's really interesting to hear about. I mean, I know the early years service is doing a bit more linking peers together, but I think as a service, it's something we are talking about more. We'd like to do more of that, and I think that's why. And I know we're not here just celebrating the toddler group, but I think that's why the toddler group has been so effective because I feel with other groups, you meet other adopters on your training and through other courses, but they're much shorter. And the toddler group, but what I've noticed with all the families who've done that, because I meet them at our fun day and things like that, is they formed over that 4 to 6 month period a much deeper connection, and they're going to each other's homes and throwing little birthday parties with the children, and it seems to make such a difference because I think adopters need both. They need both the support, and we try to offer every family support at the beginning if it's a toddler group or therapeutic parenting or GBB or one-to-one with a therapist just to help with some of that and adjust. But I don't know if I have sort of all the answers. It's certainly something we've built up a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, but I would not say we were there. I know we have somewhere to go, and I think how we take the pressure off these new parents so that they don't feel a failure and actually know it is completely normal to feel stressed and overwhelmed and wonder what the heck I'm doing because that is parenting, but it's so, so much harder for people in their situation. So, just to acknowledge, I fully agree with that. And I think it's interesting about the peer. I know the assessment teams are introducing people a bit more, but, we maybe need to develop that even further.
Thank you, Natalie. Emma.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Holly, Dee, and Natalie have said, really. It's incredibly refreshing to hear Holly and Dee you speak about these sort of real fears that you had. And I think there feels like there's such a stigma in society more broadly around talking about your feelings about your child. And I absolutely hear, Natalie, that within the adoption feel that that's like 10 times harder because of all the hoops you've had to jump through. And I think trying to think about how we can break down some of the stigma by having people who can speak so wonderfully like Holly and Dee is such an important start to really breaking down some of the sort of fear around accessing help and support, and an acknowledgement that it's going to be, the high likelihood is that it's going to be necessary, and the earlier you access, the better.
Thanks, Emma. Denise.
Yeah, I was thinking about, attachment in all of this actually, and I was thinking about how, I know we always cover attachment in preparation groups, but how really so important that is in terms of, kind of that acknowledgement that the child has got their attachment history and they've been moved, and therefore, kind of any move means that any further attachment in the future is going to be stressful because all the memories are stored in the brain. So immediately you've got a child who is coming into a family with kind of like a knowledge in their body that attaching to someone is not safe and is stressful. And so kind of then you've got your parent coming in who needs to bond with that child, but you've already got that block there from the child because they've already moved once, twice, however many times. And then that's going to, of course, however secure we are as, kind of prospective parents, everybody has got their weaknesses or their own histories, kind of that can then really get in the way of the parent being able to bond. And that sort of two-way process is so important. And I guess it's kind of like the support that then is put in, to support parents to do that bonding, kind of we very much look in the Great Behavior Breakdown around how we can bring the stress down, that the stress, if you can regulate the stress for both the parent and child, then you can get more connection, more relationship, more bonding. But I think kind of it also links into I guess what, kind of the poll was also saying, which is around, that kind of a lot of the people that have the most difficulties in terms of maybe feeling that they weren't supported or weren't prepared, are the ones who have got probably their own kind of difficulties in their own kind of past and experiences. So in a way, kind of that bit around, their kind of lives, their own trauma, their own attachment experiences, about how we do more work with that as well in the preparation part stage, but also then supporting those people because often they will be the people that find the rejection the hardest that's going to come into play from the child. And therefore, kind of if according to your attachment style, you're often then, kind of maybe then going to avoid, because of shame or kind of, other reasons, avoid accessing some of the support that's around or being able to feel supported or maybe, avoid that parenting group or kind of, not want to pick up the phone to the social worker or to kind of keep on that kind of outwardly saying, it's okay, I'm managing, it's fine. And maybe, kind of then actually things are a lot more difficult. And then again, the shame of kind of having to say, I'm not coping, kind of that, or I am finding this difficult, and being able to accept help.
Absolutely, yeah. So that difference between, there's understanding cognitively about attachment and the how attachment works, but actually attachment happens in a relationship and it evokes relational feelings and stresses and how to support people with that, kind of in the here and now.
Absolutely.
Dee, would you like to come in here?
So just a thought listening to everybody. So I feel like, when we do there's certain things maybe can be implemented, like when we do our stage ones, like how we have a panel here, like at the end of our stage one, have a panel of adopters who are in different stages to actually able to present to us, so then you kind of people start to get reality of certain things and, better perspective. And when they go on to, stage two, and obviously there is a risk that people could drop off, but surely it's better to have a good collective of adopters who understand everything from the beginning. And I feel like we all have groups that we could join after we've adopted our child, but there's questions in reality of questions that you want to ask and be able to feel comfortable to ask. And I know obviously there's a rule book of how a transition should go, but I think also that should be catered towards the individual need of that child, and also the bond developing between the child and the prospective parent once, they've gone to panel and the time they transition. I mean, my own personal experience was, I wasn't finding enough time to get him back in time to give him a bath or to get up early and breakfast because there was traffic, etc., etc. Because obviously the child's in a routine. And I kind of put forward, well, he's going to suddenly come to my house and become mine. Why doesn't he come over and stay one evening and have breakfast? Obviously, it depends on the child, but it's something to explore, not to just shut down or. So I feel it should be adapted a little bit as well.
Something about not having a one size fits all when thinking about that,
Yeah.
because actually every child and every parent is different. But also, I think you're talking about, when you talk about, the idea of a panel of people at that point, you know, we talked about kind of information. People say they want information and they need information. And I think your point raises what kind of information, because there's factual information, but there's also other types of information, people's reflections, people's experiences. And it sounds like you're talking about those being helpful as well. Paola.
Denise ended up explaining so nicely what I was going to be talking about, but this exactly that he was saying about personalizing the information that we give. I was thinking how both in preparation and then in interventions, it's so important to allow parents and support parents in understanding how the child's history plays in their potential dysregulation and how they show attachment behaviors. And then if parents, already kind of know some of these ways that behavior might present itself and what it might mean, and if parents are supported in managing those differences in the way that the child might show their needs, then they will be more prepared to also respond to them because of these challenges in both their sides of this dysregulation, like one of the quotes in the poll was saying. And we know that these children bring so many difficulties with their regulation, also associated with all of these ACEs. The poll is very, very consistent with what we know from research. It's very, very high levels of traumatic and difficult experiences that these children bring, and all of these impact at the neurobiological level. And all of this will play in the way that they ask for help and that they show their attachment needs. And they are so difficult sometimes to interpret that if parents just have this generic understanding of how attachment behavior shows, they're not going to feel ready then when the child is not showing those behaviors in an unexpected way, but maybe with support, they'll be able to see them and recognize them and respond sensitively to them. And then, help with that initial bonding and then with later impact on their behavior. Yeah.
Thank you, Paola. Thanks. Emma.
Just find the unmute button. I really pick up on what Paola and Denise were saying, just in terms of that kind of early understanding of how a child is presenting and what they're communicating and what that means at a very individual level. Because I think that the importance of really understanding the child that has come to you and how these transitions have affected the really, really subtle as well as very big scale ways that they communicate, but also how that lands with the parent and what that does. As a parent comes with their own attachment history, and these two things have to try and find a way of coming together. So I think, support to really unpick those earliest moments for a child and for the parent are important in a very individualized way.
Thanks, Emma. I suppose I'm kind of listening to all your comments, and I'm thinking about Holly and Dee. We're talking about what would be the ideal types of support for these kind of complex attachment dynamics that interact between parent and child, and the experiences they've both had and they're having. I suppose it'd be really helpful for us to hear just your reflections on, what was helpful, what did work well, and what was it about the support that you got that was helpful, that helped you. Oh, Dee, you're on mute.
I think for myself, I actually formed, which was voluntary from our group, my adoption network in my first stage one. So, so my other who are now my friends on the same course, and we're able to support each other that way and continue to do afterwards. Um, I think one of the things that I found, some of the courses I did was very rigid. They were very by a book, and then some of them were informal and felt relaxed, etc. Like, quorum, chorus did, immensely for me and gave me the confidence as I went through the whole stages of not second guessing myself, to understand that things can develop. You go through, waves of ups and downs, and and you're trying to navigate it through your own, how you're feeling and your child, and bringing that whole together. And also from the future, with the great behavior breakdown, I found pockets of things. So, but other courses were just very like A to Z. And again, it's very scripted by books and videos. And so in reality, the point I'm trying to make is, I guess, being interactive with other people who are going through my journey was most powerful help, and helped me with my child and what I did as well.
Thank you, Dee. This is really something I think coming up about the liveness of the difficulties and the challenges, and them needing to be addressed live, as they are happening, rather than, not that you can't have some good preparation, because I think you've talked about some really good preparation you've had, but that in addition, there's something about being able to tailor help to not just the uniqueness, but the actual real life happening of those challenges, and in the moment. Holly, I didn't know if you wanted to come in before I come next to Denise.
Yes, I agree with everything Dee said, basically. And what people were saying before about, the knowledge of the child and attachment, it just made me think, because my learning log was very long. I'm like a prolific reader. I love to read. But there is nothing that prepares you for in that moment when the child is dysregulated. And with my daughter particularly, she would self-harm in the moment. And all the reading I did just couldn't prepare me for how my emotional reaction to that, and even not acting on it, you'd lose your thinking brain in that moment, and I would panic and think, I actually don't know what to do, or how to help her, as well as it just being absolutely heartbreaking. And so I think exactly that live action help in the moment, like you're saying, Sarah, I found in the chorus playgroup that, to be honest, that was the most helpful thing that we did of all. I just, having that support network, the safe space where you feel comfortable to tell people exactly what's happening, and then hopefully that somebody sees something. Again, I'm digging. I'm so sorry. I'm rubbish. I don't know how to mute it.
Don't worry, it's
I
not
can't.
disturbing
I'm
us at
sorry.
all.
I'm really just such a technophobe. Yeah, having the help in the moment and the support, and then over time, I guess, the confidence to manage it and to know how best to help them, and that you are best to help them. I felt like maybe I wasn't, I didn't feel like I could help her. It felt like her needs were too great for me, and I felt like I was doing her a disservice by her, being with me at certain points. And I think being surrounded by other adoptive parents in that community really over time gave me the confidence and the support to realize that I could, and I could do it well, with support.
Thanks, Holly. It's so powerful hearing you and Dee, you as well, talk about your experiences with your child, your emotional experiences with your child. And I was just thinking, something we go on about a lot in our groups is kind of that when children are distressed, dysregulated, that actually that parents so easily feel that they criticize themselves for that. They feel that means they're parenting badly, or they're failing, they're not doing something well enough, when actually that's their child's communication, that they're communicating to their parent that they want to use them, or trying to find a way to use them. And so sort of supporting parents to kind of really feel that, and in that way then the panic can reduce a bit and parents can start to meet the needs. I think that's feels like a really powerful experience sometimes. Denise, I know you wanted to come in.
Okay. Um, yeah, I was just thinking about, I mean, it's a long while since I've done any preparation group. So I did that many years ago. So I'm sure they've moved on a lot. But one of the things I was thinking about was a kind of, and Dee will know because you sat through the Great Behavior Breakdown, but in the Great Behavior Breakdown, we actually, kind of do really simple attachment theory and simple like brain development. So simple to the point that we can say, which part of the brain are you talking to right now? Because there's only sort of the, three parts. And I'm just kind of thinking that that's really helpful, a sort of thing to kind of revisit, because when you sort of take it out, that it's like actually it's that part of the brain that's responding, like the, kind of it's stress, the amygdala's going, kind of it almost sort of takes it away a little bit from that is the child, kind of in their personality or kind of their behavior. It's literally that's a part of the brain. And maybe that's a part of the parent brain too, that's kind of like reacting to that. But my point actually was around, kind of in that preparation stage, my memory is that quite a lot of the, asking people about their past or their own childhood experiences was done individually. What we find really useful is, kind of when we're doing the groups, we have some simple things around core scripts, messages you received when you were a child, how you were disciplined, what you do differently, how that they're all stored in the brain, all those memories. And they're simple exercises for parents, but what's absolutely amazing is the joining that you get there, because, it's kind of like, we will share, we will, as trainers, we will share some of our own core scripts and some of kind of the things that, how we were disciplined. And what that does is that then opens up. So people start to be really honest about it, but then you get a joining. So, someone might say, oh yeah, and this is very difficult, but, I was beaten as a child. And someone else might say, yeah, I was too. And somehow that kind of gives permission in some ways for people to say some of the things they might not say so willingly on a one-to-one in an assessment process. And then it's kind of like really thinking, well, kind of that's your experience, and your experience is all stored in your brain. So, then it's really hard work to kind of, if we were shouted at, for example, for discipline, it's really difficult then to almost stop yourself from doing the same thing when you're under stress. So we have to work really hard not to. And I just think some of that group, and I don't know, whether it is in preparation groups now or it could be, but some of that group sharing, I think kind of almost brings people's defenses down a bit, but it also takes away some of the shame of that, or the worry that if someone hears that, they might be worried about me being kind of an adoptive parent or whatever. Because, let's face it, a lot of us have received, kind of adverse experiences in our own parenting. And that's shared, it's kind of shared amongst workers, amongst professionals. So we've all got our views, that are, or kind of our experiences that have come from that influence our views. So, I suppose I'm just sort of thinking around that too. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. It feels really important, that actually it can become very adoption focused, and actually biological parenting can be romanticized too.
Yeah, absolutely. It can. Yeah.
I come to Dee next.
Got Denise had her hand up. I think I agree with Denise. That's what I was thinking, that there's an extra layer for us. We, how our childhood was. Is like we're trying our best not to, because my upbringing was totally different and pretty much what Denise said. And I would not want that for my child. However, I think for us as adoptive parents, we still have the echo of natural parents around us and friends and families who still doesn't understand the journey up to today. And I think we'll continue that and expect our child to be normal. And, why is he behaving this way? You need to discipline him this way. You need to not do. And we have all those extra barriers as well to deal with. And I think, and we're constantly advocating for our child to say, we understand that he's going through this, he's experiencing that, etc., etc. But we have that additional pressure as well. So, as Denise said, being prepared more and being with your group at any stage and having that community from the beginning could kind of help you grow all the way through to when you actually become a parent. And I think that would ease some of your anxiety, understand reality, and prepare you a bit more. Because you're always going to have the noise. It's just you choose whether you want to invite that noise in or not. It's your choice. You're the parent and you make that decision for your child.
Thank you, dear. It feels like such a helpful way to say it. No one's going to kind of just eradicate the noise for you. That's not what we're here to think about doing because we don't have magic wands. Thank you. Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. For all of that, definitely from both Dee and Denise. I'm just sort of going back a couple of points, really. I mean, just with the transition, I'm sorry to hear that Dee, yours was obviously quite rigid because the whole point of the kind of current model. Because I remember when I first started on I sort of went from children looked after into adoption. I was really horrified even back then how quickly they moved children in, sort of 2 or 3 days, and said, just make it quick and they'll get over it, and just awful. So, the model that we have from the University of East Anglia is what is supposed to base transitions. It's supposed to be adapted and tailor-made. So if you're going through that as an adopter, be aware of that. That's what every agency should be using now. And I'm sorry to hear it didn't feel like that for you at all. One thing, and I know no one can change this here, but if we're kind of putting together listeners' needs, and if you're sending this up higher, I don't know how high you're going to sort of put the outcome, because it's just what frustrates myself when I did work in doing assessments is there's very strict timelines about writing these, particularly in stage 2, and they're really intense. And I'm sure Holly and do you probably hardly had a chance. So it's really weird because it might feel like it takes forever to do an assessment, but when you actually get into it, it's a very short period of time. So you're having to do about 8 or 9 visits very, very quickly, discuss these really in-depth, huge issues. So, how you were parented, difficult experiences from your past, how that's going to impact your parenting, how you're going to apply that to a child. Really massive issues that a lot of us spend our lives trying to figure out in a kind of 8, 9 week period, because then you have to write the whole thing up and have it into panels sort of 3 weeks in the advance, so all the managers can sign it off and it can go. And these are the adoption regulations, and I gather it was sort of changed about 7, 8 years ago because I think there was too much drift and that's why it was done. And I get that, but it's sort of gone so extreme that I think things like attachment style sort of interviewing where you wrestle actually, what is my attachment style? How has my attachment been impacted? Then you've got these very, very sort of, you've got to have it in by then, what's going on here? And everyone gets sort of judged on these time frames. It's like Ofsted for adoption agencies. And this gets lost. And this was my biggest frustration, that I felt I was pushed when I wrote these assessments as a social worker to not have the time to sometimes really absorb, process, and deal with some of this stuff because it's massive and it's heavy. And then you have to then apply it all, have sorted it all, and be ready to adopt this child. So I have a huge, so I do think I know maybe this is something that'll change, but I think it needs to be continually fed back. We need to be going around the pace of what's right for these adoptive parents because it's such a life change. And I'm not trying to cause delay. I just mean doing what's kind of reasonable so you can wrestle these things because I do think it's impacted some of that assessment. But I know there is a group in Adopt London South for adopters who wait, but of course things have changed a lot since then. So I'm just sort of hearing from you, Dee, you're sort of saying it would be good to kind of maybe with your prep group have check-in groups or something like that kind of when you come back together, because it's great to hear that your prep group connected, because not all prep groups do. And it's kind of what we do about those, because chorus has been great for that, but not everyone does chorus. Lots of people do lots of different, all sorts of interventions. So um, I'm just sort of picking up, you're sort of saying that would be that kind of early stage group is what you're kind of saying, where you can come back together, or even have drop in or that kind of stuff. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I feel like what should happen is after we finish stage two, there should be like a booklet given with like resources of, and I mean, whether people form their own little community and they have drop-in groups, or, just so you can share your experiences. And then
Yeah.
after you adopt your child, is there like all these different access? Because I found mine literally through my friend networks, like my community of adopted friends, and found X, Y, and Z
From your
network to
prep
go to.
group, was that, or from,
Yeah,
yeah.
from
So
my prep group.
I mean, that's the idea, one of the ideas of the prep groups. You get that, but not, and it's good to hear you did. And I see the chorus groups doing that, but I know some people, the prep group just hasn't connected in the same way. Particularly, I think they're doing more in person now, but of course, it used to be after COVID, everything went online, 10 London boroughs, but wide areas. So it's been quite complex, but it's just good to hear that. And that's definitely something I'll sort of reflect back to those parts of our service.
I think, yeah, because, being online, it's a community of online, and like people got used to that so much over COVID that
True.
doing person, and even if it's like things like putting up like once every couple of months a coffee morning in different areas that you could pop in and talk to each other, you
Yeah.
know, that is voluntary to people itself. And
For neuro adopters, yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah,
I mean, an advocate, like after that, people who want to volunteer, to be mentors, to talk, to connect, to have a phone
yeah.
call,
It,
etc. It's all very live, as Sarah
yeah,
said. You want something
yeah. I think
on the pulse kind of thing.
mentoring is, I think it's, yeah, I absolutely hear about mentoring. It's something, it's very small scale right now, and I know other RAs who've got whole programs, and I would love to have one. The funding is always an issue to
Mhm.
support things, but I'm not trying to be all political, but that is the
Yeah,
reality, is that
the
the
answer.
services are very stretched, which is, because I know a lot of the time we aren't offering the level of support people need.
And yeah, and thank you, Natalie, for sort of bringing, it's really helpful to hear the perspective in a way from, I'm not saying you are the system and you're a person in working very hard in a system, but you're bringing that kind of systemic perspective about what are the kind of barriers in a way, and the things that
Mm,
can get in the way of, doing this extremely, as you were saying, you said so kind of movingly in a way, such a complex task. So that I think that's very important for us all to hold in mind. And then linked with what Dee was bringing, that actually there are some quite light touch things that might be
mm,
possible, like
yeah.
mentoring, that could really support. Can I bring in Emma now?
Yeah, I was just sort of reflecting on what Denise, Natalie, and Dee were talking about in terms of the kind of the process, and I was thinking a bit about those parents who find it really hard to reach out for, presumably lots of reasons, but some of those to do with kind of stigma and worry and feeling like they should be able to manage. And I was thinking about what Natalie was talking about, how, and Denise, about sort of the process sort of driving the direction rather than the capacity to reflect. Because I guess we know that where parents feel really listened to and heard and are able to reflect on their experiences and feel that those are understood and not judged, that that then going forward they feel more able to kind of be able to sort of open up, share, and that capacity for a parent's reflection about themselves and their own histories and the impact of those histories on their capacity to relate to others and to their children are going to really be critical to the kind of capacity in a parent to be able to take on board and reach out for help and all of those kind of things. So it was just really a reflection on how those elements can be really prioritized, not wanting to hold up the journey, not wanting to sort of delay things, but that the capacity to acknowledge that everyone will have had adverse experiences, and how you reflect and think about those experiences is really going to govern how you end up feeling later on, and how able you feel to access support if those things feel heard and not judged about you.
Thanks, Emma. And Denise.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that other part that was raised around, kind of often the support not being there so much from, and we often get this in our groups from, kind of the people that everybody expected to support them. Suddenly it sort of falls away. And kind of, I guess what Dee was saying too around, kind of that you're often surrounded by people who have got neurotypical kind of securely attached children who are talking about, kind of basically giving their views or kind of talking about the problems they might be having with their children and suggestions about how you deal with certain behaviors, which would be very different to how we would deal with those for children that have had trauma. I was just thinking about the use of family and friends days and whether that's something that you are still like anybody does really. Certainly, I've been part of those in the past, and they are just great because they're like an information for that network. We build up that beautiful network about all these people that are supporting us, kind of, or supporting the parents. And then it's actually bringing a lot of those together to the key people to, kind of really inform them around kind of some of the extra things that a child with attachment and trauma history, kind of may bring. And kind of when that's been used with the families I've known about, it's been just really helpful, because it's just an information rather than not about necessarily about a specific child, unless a parent wanted a little bit of their own child's, kind of to talk about their own child a little bit, but more a general view about these are the things, and this is the way that kind of why I have to parent differently.
Yeah. Not falling on the parent to have to do all that educating themselves.
Yeah. And even leaflets on that. I know we had one at one point, kind of, that we would be handing out to people, like a family and friends leaflet. Okay.
Thanks, Denise. Natalie, did you want to?
I was just going to respond. We are doing those. We do Adopt London do them between the four for families in this area. And actually, it's interesting. We've just starting again well, we did it once, and probably in the new year, myself and my colleagues have sort of put a little, presentation together to do it for families later on, because what a lot of adoptive families say, there's when they first adopt, they have all these friends and everyone sort of goes, oh yeah, we support. But the reality is with so many as adopters is friends fall away, circumstances change, some people just aren't comfortable, or they have their own families and other commitments, and often your network changes when you adopt and go further along the line. So in the post-adoption service, we will be running some of our own ones for people a bit further down the line, or for those teenagers, because right now I know we're looking at younger children. I know today's about younger children, but younger children grow into teenagers. And for me, the whole value of this is if we get it right younger, and that's why we try to give quite a lot more energy into younger, then, and if placements start well and attachments build, then hopefully we'll be really quiet in post adoption when they're 14, because they'll all be sorted and it'll be fine. I can dream on. But it's just things change, children change, and networks change. So we are now introducing one, hopefully starting in January, to do that. But any suggestions you have, Denise, I'm very open, because we sort of pull together something, but it's going to be sort of trial and error, and sort of anything that's sort of useful if those families are more established. And we do have a family fun day once a year, but that's for adopters with their adopted children to sort of come along and, go on the climbing wall and eat ice cream and that kind of stuff. So, but it's only one day a year. It's not, it's not a lot. I do acknowledge that.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm going to come to Emma, and then we're going to have to wrap up. I knew we would feel we could just go on forever, but so I'm going to come to Emma, and then maybe come to Dee and Holly again, just for if you've got any last reflections. So yeah, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just following on, it's really lovely to hear from Natalie that these sort of things are happening. And I was sort of wondering, maybe at a bit more of a societal level, I'm aware that there's such a lack of understanding in extended families, but I think in society more generally, and that that means that when families do go to statutory services to ask for help, health professionals, that they don't feel understood and they don't feel heard and listened to, and that they don't feel that their child is really, and their early adverse experiences are really kind of taken into account. And I was just wondering about that kind of how all of the knowledge that is inside adoption can be filtered outside of adoption a bit more.
Yeah, really important question, and maybe could have some really creative answers if we had more time, but we'll carry on thinking about that. Can I, as we've run out of time and we can't carry on forever, we want to leave a bit of time to address some of the questions that have come up. I just come to you, Dee, just if you've got any last kind of reflections.
I think, I mean, my journey so far has been, early stage was very bumpy, but, not very challenging, but it's going in a good direction. I think my takeaway as well is that I know some, like, not my social worker, but my son's social worker said that we should really cut the ties of the foster carers, etc. But, they're the ones who brought him in, gave him that first bit of life, and we're very close. And I encourage anybody out there that to carry on that journey, if the foster carers allow you to, because they're so helpful. And as you progress with your child, you'll know the indication yourself and be confident with the educate, and that bit with yourself. I think that's amazing. That's an amazing journey, and yeah, and you will be more prepared, and use the network around you, the support, and from the social system, and I think from that side, I just think for us, it's just more practical information, more practical things, tools that we can use, because yeah, perspective of some of doctors like Holly's been through, the nursery, been, and maybe in the social services, and they've had some sort of experience with children in education, etc., and have gone on to adopt. But then, a lot of families may not have experienced any children at all. And I know you have to volunteer to do some, but that isn't enough. So I think is a lot more support, practical support, I think is needed.
Thank you, Dee. Thanks so much. Holly.
Yeah, I agree with Dee. That's practical support. I think the word practical there is key. As you're saying, everything's written, but that's really important. I was also listening to Emma, and I think you couldn't have said that better about the information very much being inside the adoption community and the adoption circle, and how can we get that out there so that people can have more support and feel more supported. I'm very privileged in that I've experienced both types of parenting. So I also have a birth child, and that often gives me clout in a way that it shouldn't. That people kind of go, oh, okay, right. So you have experienced that, and you are saying this is hard, rather than trying to fob you off with, all parenting's hard, which it is. But as we all know, it's very different when you're dealing with children that have trauma and attachment. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's really important. And how can we try and get more of this information to be mainstream, so that in communities people are more supported in general? Like, my daughter's just started school, and that's a whole nother ball game, with the school and parents and everybody. There just doesn't seem much understanding. So yeah, but exactly what Dee said, practical support, I think is going to be key. And I think that's where the play groups and things like that are just fantastic. And the family fun day, we always go to that. It is really fun. It's brilliant. Never get rid of that. We love it. It's just, it makes me feel all the feels when I walk around and seeing all the families and the children and the social workers. It feels, it's like Christmas for us. It's really magical.
I know we love it, so we try not to. I'm going to butt in here, please. If you can keep in contact with foster carers, do. I completely disagree with that social worker who said that. So, But this is the problem, is adoption's quite nuanced and specialist knowledge, and a lot of people don't understand it. But how fantastic for your son to be able to have a relationship and know for those people who care for him in his early life. Really good for his life story work and all of that. So Dee, you're doing the right thing, and I completely disagree. Anyone else can challenge me on that, but that's my feeling.
Thank
We're
you,
the same.
Natalie, for
I
butting
just had
in.
to come in there, sorry.
But I mean, I think it's really emblematic, isn't it, of what
Yeah.
of the whole kind of what we've been talking about, which is conflicting messages and how hard it can be to get those, like you say, those nuanced understandings out there.
Mhm.
Thank you so much to everyone on the panel for really generously sharing your experiences and your expertise with this webinar today. I think it's been a really, really interesting conversation, and I think hopefully we will be able to build a really interesting, I hope, kind of charter from this to kind of advocate for support at this early stage for adoptive families. I'm just going to, before we end, we've got about 15 minutes left and we've got some questions from the attendees. So, and I think Eva's going to come back into the kind of spotlight now. I think actually we're going to have everyone spotlighted for this so that everyone can answer these questions, or anyone can answer who wants to. So the first question here, I've got someone is coming back to the final quote. I think people should be able to see it maybe if I do this. So this person says the final quote really resonates with the family I'm working with at the moment and many others. So that was the quote about, the shift between kind of the assessment process period and then the real start of being a parent. I wonder about how professionals are impacted by concern about not wanting to discourage prospective adoptive parents from adopting, but balancing this with needing to be realistic to help parents feel more prepared. And I think that's something that Dee spoke to. It feels like a very difficult balance for professionals to strike, but also can leave parents ill-informed. Don't know if anyone wants to respond to that. Yeah, Natalie. Have you just still got your hand up?
I'd left my hand up.
Ah.
That is incredibly hard. You don't want to put people off, but you've got to be. I try to be as honest as possible with people because they need to know this is lifelong. And if it's not right for them, I think Dee said it earlier, it's better to be honest and people drop out. And I don't see it as a failure if people drop at the end of stage one, because I think it just means it wasn't right for them. Because believe if it's not right and they're not prepared, we will, in post-adoption, we'll pick up the pieces of that when that child's 12, 8, 15, 18. I really see, I see some amazing adoption families that work it really well, incredible adopters who do everything for that child. But I have seen some tragically, particularly we get into teens with that, there's just no relationship and they can't cope and it breaks down. And sometimes the children comes back into care, or even if they don't, they don't belong or fit, or they haven't claimed one another or connected. So I hear what you're saying, but I actually always go for, in a gentle, sensitive way, given the reading, all of that. But I think be honest, and that's probably, as the others are saying, a good time to sort of introduce them to people who have adopted already or a bit further down the track would be my approach. So I think it's better to be honest and direct and clear if you're in that situation. But I agree, it's not easy, but better that than us being here 10 years down the line and it's falling apart.
And perhaps there's something also about training for professionals actually in that, and because I think this person said the impact on professionals, it's a hard thing to do. So something about, yeah, broader training for professionals, not just in adoption, but more broadly.
Yeah. I think that is a slight struggle, because if you work in one of the RAs, it's great. But the problem about the whole RA system that was set up 5-6 years ago is it's put us all into one agency. Well, originally I used to work for Lewisham. I'd sit there and I'd talk to other social workers, and that knowledge would be more dispersed. But we've been through government policy, and there's pros and cons to that. I would say there's been some things are better, some things are worse by doing this model, but it has isolated us more, and we're very sort of high turnover of social workers within the local authorities. We do find knowledge is lost all the time and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I feel I'm taking over here, but
No.
I absolutely acknowledge your dilemma, but it's so much better to be honest, because otherwise, honestly, I pick up the pieces all the time with families who are struggling to cope.
Paola.
Just to quickly add that there's evidence that matching expectations with reality is associated with better adjustment in the adoption then. So we have actually evidence that we should give prospective adopters more information and more transparent information.
Thank you, Paola. That's really helpful. Maybe afterwards you could share that research with us, but that's really helpful to know. Thank you. And I think Dee.
Yeah, and I think as a potential adopter, you should challenge any concerns that you have. Don't feel the fear of being judged, that if you say something that it might be wrong, if you feel that you need to understand more and, it's not like I'm not, I mean, I'm saying this broadly, it's a sales technique. You try, your social workers saying something, but, challenge it, tell your fears, be honest, because I remember when I was doing when I was doing my potential of my child, I held back some of the questions because I was worried that I'd be judged by asking the questions in reality. Now, in hindsight, I wish I'd have been more confident to go ahead and do it because, it is so always as a doctor, this is for life. So you need to ask as many questions as possible and explore as many things and don't feel afraid at any point from the time you get matched onwards, don't be afraid. Tell reality because this is for your forever. This is, your plus one or part of your family forever.
Thank you, Dee. I'm going to move on to the next question just because we haven't got a lot of time left. So this is someone who works as a therapist who's asking, one of the dilemmas I've seen with loving and attuned adoptive parents is to put firm boundaries in place, especially with children who hit them or are aggressive. I suspect as they fear they'd be rejecting of the child. Where do parents get support for this? Dee, is your hand up again or is it left up? No. Denise, come in.
Okay, so I know a lot of people are put on MVR programs, so I know there's that whole kind of training course, which is really, really valuable. I guess kind of what we often think about from GBB, Great Behavior Breakdown, is we think about kind of what, in a way, what's happening for that child in that sort of violent cycle. So if there's violence, kind of, if we're not dealing with it in some way, then it can add to the shame, kind of from obviously the parent's going to feel some shame, but also for the child or young person who's doing the hitting or hurting. So kind of like almost like a little bit of psychoeducation around, kind of if your child, if that child is hitting out, kind of then people get hit or hurt. There's usually an unpredictable response from the parent because if you're hit or hurt, you tend to react because it does hurt. And kind of like, so what we want to do is try and make that response more consistent. But what we also think about is around kind of the shame then that's produced for the child. So afterwards, even if they're saying, well, I don't care, I hate you or whatever it is, there will be a feeling inside of shame. And in a way, if that's not addressed in some way, if that feeling's left there and then they continue to feel the shame, then because they're feeling the shame and feeling bad, they're more likely to do it again. So that cycle is more likely to continue. So I guess that's a little bit about psychoeducation, but in a way, kind of we would think about in our model, like around a safety plan, but which involves the parent really acknowledging about kind of how the child or young person, isn't going to be feeling good and how, we want you to feel better. We want everybody in the family to be feeling better. So I know that's just a tiny little bit on kind of how we would approach it more, but I think that it's so important because actually, in some ways, if we're not calling it out, but we call it out in a quite a gentle way, in a way, but if we're not calling it out to that young person, kind of, and we think that that's helping us to, kind of that's avoiding rejection or whatever, then actually we might be doing that young person disservice in that they, part of the continuation of that might be their shame response, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's, I think it's about helping parents who are loving and attuned, understanding actually that it's about the child's safety as well as theirs, and that can be really helpful to understand.
Yeah. And so really trying to get alongside to think about, kind of how can we both stay in a positive relationship with you, but also kind of be addressing that and thinking about what else could that young person do, or could we do when it comes to that point, of prospective violence. Yeah.
Thanks, Denise. And Emma, can I bring you in here as well?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything Denise just said, and I really appreciate the therapist bringing this incredibly difficult topic, because it can feel like, to put in boundaries, you're not parenting therapeutically, and you're disrupting and distressing your child. And so I think the answer is that it is incredibly complicated, and it's incredibly sensitive, and it needs to be thought about very carefully. And so I'm so glad it was raised as a question, because every circumstance is going to need a really good unpicking and thinking about. But fundamentally, I absolutely agree with what Denise says, that if a child is left feeling they've done something that's upsetting or harmful or hurtful to their caregiver, that it's really going to start to impact on their sense of themselves and who they are, and that will become part of that child's identity without modification. So I think it's really, really important to very carefully, sensitively unpick how you can put in safe, stable boundaries that enable a child to feel like they're held, but they don't like it.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. I'm just aware of the time, so I think I'm going to move on to, I think we'll have one more question before we wrap up. So we've got a family finding social worker has asked a question here. If I just click on it, hopefully people can see it. I'm a family finding social worker and always leave room in transitions to allow a longer time if needed, to incorporate overnight stays, and making use of the midway review to be open and honest about what the child needs, and the prospective adopters, what they need, I think. I do think it's better to take longer and get it right than rush and crash. So it's more of a comment than a question, actually, but I think really relevant to what we're talking about, which is that flexibility in the transition period, and really thinking about the particular needs of the individual child and parents. And I think it's a big theme in a way of today, isn't it? That really bears repeating, the long term, that we're trying to think about putting things in place that might be difficult in the short term, like boundaries when your child hits you, or a kind of longer transition that might feel a bit drawn out. But actually, for the reason for that is for the kind of long-term gain of stability and the feeling of being really prepared. I don't know if anyone else has a last comment on that before we wrap up. Not an easy thing to ask you to do in a minute or so. Okay, well, actually, maybe then that's a good place to leave things today, because I do want to keep a little bit of time just to thank our panel again. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing your insights with us, and in particular to our parents, Holly and Dee, for coming and really openly giving us a sense of your experiences, which is really the best way for us all to learn about this area, and for us all to kind of think creatively about how we can do more of the good things and less of the not so helpful things, and what else can be done. So, we'll be writing this up, and I think Natalie asked where it was going to go, and we're not sure, but we'll try and get it in front of as many people as possible, really high up. Eva's saying, yeah, really high up. And yes, thanks everyone very much. I think Eva's just going to put a final slide up. Oh, and I think Eva, you might have some last words as well. I think you're muted.
Thank you. I couldn't unmute and slide and no gum and walking for me. Just to sort of echo, thank you to our panel. Thank you for all our participants being here. Sorry we couldn't answer all the questions next time. And what we'll do is that once we've sort of pulled together and had a sort of good sort of think through today, we will be sharing that charter very widely on all our networks. So keep an eye out for that. And in answer to your question, Natalie, we want to send it to the top, to space, to the bottom of the sea, to all around. So we're going to be sharing it very widely, making a really big noise, because we know we have to advocate for these children and their families who do such an incredible, life-changing act of love. So yeah, no romanticism, just passion.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks to everyone who joined, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion today.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thanks so much, Emma.
Thank you, Emma.
It was beautiful, and you just spoke so beautifully about relationship throughout that panel, which was just really amazing.
It was lovely. I realised we sort of didn't make a sort of debrief plan, but yeah, thank you so much.
No, well done. What an amazing event. How many people came? Do you have?
We had 43 at the top.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's about half of the sign-ups, which I think is the right.
Yeah.
You get about half of the sign-ups.
It's just really wonderful. Yeah, what you're doing. Really, really impressive.
Well, thank you. Thank you again so much for coming. And
thank you for inviting me. And it was, lovely to work alongside you. Maybe we need to, go for a debrief drink at some point.
I think we do need to do that. Can we definitely do that, please? Yeah.
All right. Take care. See you.
Take care. Bye.